Okay, well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to today's version of our COVID-19 TravelMole interview. And I'm delighted to have with me my friend and colleague, John McEwan, who most of you in the travel industry would know. Has a stellar career in travel and still is doing his bit with many non-executive positions, as I understand it, with up-and-coming tour operators and all sorts of things to do with the travel industry. So good morning, John.
Morning, Graham.
How are you doing in this COVID-19 lockdown?
Well, it's quite an interesting change, isn't it? Actually, I find working from home in some respects has its benefits. It's more productive. You've got less distractions. You're clearly not commuting, but you do miss that interaction with people, which is an integral part of any business, but particularly in the travel industry.
Yeah. I mean, I've been saying in some of these discussions I've had that the job of travel in every respect, including meetings, including evening events, etc., it's all about bringing people together, and COVID-19 is the antithesis of that. You know, you've got to keep a minimum of 2 meters away, and that's if you can get anywhere near anybody or meet anybody. I know the restrictions have lessened yesterday, but it's still a huge issue from a social point of view. But what do you think that the short and the medium-term prospects are for travel in the UK? You know, when I talk about travel, I'm talking about outbound travel, because obviously we, along with every other piece of media in the country, is reporting on tough times for tour operators. Some tour operators not being able to or not willing to repay deposits, etc. What's your general feeling about it?
Well, I think the first thing we have to put into context is that we're living in a period which nobody's seen and nobody's alive to see that last occurred 100 years ago. We've never had a global pandemic like that since the Spanish flu in 1918. So we all, I think, appreciate the scale, but when you see it's happening in virtually every country in the world, it really brings home to you that this really is a global pandemic, and we have to take it very seriously. And that's why we've been going through all the precautionary steps, or the government is trying to lead us through these precautionary steps to make sure that we can get out of it the other end without too many more deaths. So it's in that context that we're operating. But coming back to the travel industry, clearly the impact of the virus has had a dramatic effect on the fortunes of every operator, every retailer, every provider of services in the travel industry. And we've reached a fairly unique situation where there's no new income coming in to speak of. We can talk about green shoots a little later, but there's no real income coming in. But we have this major responsibility to refund clients for those that can no longer take their trips, or the trips have already been cancelled. And so there's a lot of preoccupation, if you like, with people in the industry of having to service their clients in a way that actually gives the client satisfaction, but at the same time facing the dilemma they have where they don't have the money available to provide immediate refunds to those clients. And I think we're all familiar with the situation and why it's being caused. But here we've got a classic case in the industry where it's created a domino effect, and it begins with the airlines. It's the airlines actually that have found themselves in significant difficulty. Even in normal times, a lot of them are not operating with a lot of surplus cash, but now they don't have that surplus cash, and they're trying to hold on to it through the issuance of vouchers and so on. Some airlines have actually now taken the step of giving refunds, which takes the pressure off. But nevertheless, that is the reality. And I think there's something I may come back to a bit later about what we should do about client protection and so on. But then, of course, the consequence of the airlines not having the money to give back, or reluctant to give the money back to the intermediaries, which are the tour operators in most cases, or maybe directly to the consumer as well. It's created this domino effect where the tour operators who are obliged under the Package Travel Directive to give the money back to clients within 14 days are waiting for those monies to come in from the principals, whether it's an airline, whether it's a hotel, whether it's a ground handler, and so on. And that in turn actually creates pressure on the travel agents, who have no legal responsibility, but it's their clients. So we've actually got this domino effect that's actually occurring. And that's put tremendous pressure on every business. So it's not only the cost of running your business, but it's actually the obligation to have to customers. And I feel that if this were to continue for, say, another 6 months from here, there are inevitably going to be a lot of casualties. People will simply run out of cash. And the one thing I think that has actually prevented that happening already is actually all the work that the government's done on the financial protection side. So whether it's loans, whether it's grants, whether it's the furlough scheme, and in particular the furlough scheme. And Rishi Sunak announced yesterday, of course, that it's now being extended to the end of July, and it'll go on to October in some sort of shape, but there'll still be a contribution from the government. And without that, I think we will have already seen businesses going under, hundreds of thousands of people being made redundant already. This has actually provided a breathing space. It doesn't necessarily solve the problem though, because once we get to the end of the furlough period, if the markets haven't started to pick up and we see new income coming in, then companies will be faced with the dilemma of, I can't afford to keep all these people on. Sure. So we're in a very difficult period here where we have an obligation to our customers, an obligation to our staff and our teams, but facing the reality that there's no golden money tree out there that you could just get access to, because I think it's pretty much being exhausted now with what the government have done.
Yeah, the government financial packages to support the economy has been very, very comprehensive, particularly when I talk to colleagues that are from other countries. I think there's no doubting the fact that the furlough scheme, the self-employment scheme, the government-backed loans, etc., they've all been very, very comprehensive. And I think without it, that we would already be in a situation of much higher unemployment. Do you think, however, getting back to travel specifically, do you think we as an industry have done a good job in explaining some of the intricacies?
No, we haven't.
Maybe even pointing the finger. And then you were in a leadership position ABTA for a number of years. I wondered what you think that that the role that ABTA have played, and indeed the stance that ABTA have made, is good enough, basically.
Yeah, it's a good question, Graham. I think we need to just step. I'll come back to ABTA, but if you just step back just a moment, there has been confusion as a result of the circumstances here, all the way through from the EU. In terms of the position of the airlines, which I touched on earlier, they're obligated to give money back within 14 days. They're not doing it. There's no legislation that actually provides financial protection around airlines. So even though they're now issuing vouchers, for example, those vouchers would be worthless if the airline goes bust in the period of that voucher. So there has to be legislation, which doesn't help us now, but legislation that comes in that says anybody buying an airline ticket is financially protected. And I think the EU and the UK government have dodged that for many years. You recall that we've been speaking for at least 15 years about £1 a passenger to pay into to actually protect the customers. That's never happened, but I think there will be a lot more pressure as a consequence of this. The EU regulation around package travel directive is a great initiative from customers' point of view, but doesn't allow any flexibility for a unique situation like this. In fact, various European countries are starting to bend the rules anyway by either extending the period or saying that credit notes / vouchers are legitimate. The UK has not helped either, and in terms of the UK government, because ABTA launched the initiative, as you know, to say, well, you can issue a credit note that's linked to the original booking, and our interpretation of UK law is you will be financially protected under the ASOL scheme. And what we haven't had from the government is confirmation that, in fact, that is legally correct. And they're still saying that actually, no, it's still the package travel directive. So there's been no movement there. We had some confusion yesterday, you may recall, where in the morning we were told that the government had actually said that it was legally protected. And by last evening, they changed their position. So on the one hand, I think from ABTA's point of view, I welcome the initiative they brought in, because if there's no flexibility from our government, particularly the UK government, on the package travel directive, and actually showing a degree of flexibility on that, then actually what would have happened is that if that had been abided by universally, then again, we would have precipitated the demise of lots of companies in the UK that would have run out of cash and would have had to close down. And therefore, you would have been putting tens of thousands, if not more, back into the unemployment pool. And the cost of that would have had to be supported by the government. So, I think, I'm in favour of what ABTA did. I'm not sure I agree with necessarily extending the period which they subsequently got to, which is in line with the ATOL scheme, which says if your ATOL license runs for 12 months, you can issue a voucher for 12 months. I think there should be more pressure on retailers and or tour operators, rather, to actually give a maximum of, say, 90 days. I think that would be perfectly reasonable for a company to say, where can I source the cash that I need in order to actually fulfill my obligations to the clients. 14 days in the current climate, despite what one or two vocal people have said in the industry, it's just not realistic at this point. But 90 days, I think most customers would understand, they would accept, because they would know during that period that their money is financially protected. They are going to get it. It's a question of when, and I think most people will accept 90 days. So I'm not really critical of ABTA on this initiative. It was a little bit between a rock and a hard place. You had to say what's in the best interest of the customer and what's also in the best interest of travel companies in the UK, and trying to find that middle ground through the credit note vehicle.
Yeah, it does. I mean, from my, if you like, from the outside, it does appear to be a confusing situation, and you could argue that the travel industry has not made a good case of explaining what you've just said, in effect, that, the airlines in many respects are at the root of it. They're not playing ball. They're running out of money. They've put their aeroplanes into a park in southern France or California or wherever they are. So it's not, basically the travel industry needs some good PR at the moment. At the moment, it's just got nothing but bad PR. Our social media feeds are just full of disgruntled consumers rather than trade people. They're disgruntled consumers who haven't got their money. Yeah. And they've been told flatly they're not going to get it back. But let's just move on a little bit, because I think it's safe to say that the short to mid-term prospects for a revival in the travel industry aren't exactly good. In terms of longer, I mean, say we take this time next year, do you see some people in the industry are saying that 2021 will actually be a bumper season because, there's a pent-up demand with the 80% furlough scheme? Some people are actually saving money because they're not going out down the pub, they're not going to restaurants, they're not traveling to work every day. Do you see that scenario, or do you think this would continue and it's going to be 3 or 4 years before we see a revival?
No, I don't see the latter, Graham. I don't see it 3 to 4 years at all. I think what we're going to see is, I don't think there's going to be, I can't see how 2021 can be what we would describe as a bumper year. But I think there will be a gradual recovery. And we don't know precisely when that's going to take place. I think based on the advice from the government about the quarantine and everything else, which is still unclear, to be honest. They haven't sort of put any conditions around that. But if you could make an assumption on the basis that we get control of the virus, that's always the caveat. If we get to a situation where later in the summer, let's say September, we start to see borders opening up. There's already a lot of energy in Europe. The EU is trying to coordinate a program across the EU countries to actually open borders in a synchronized way. And of course, the Southern Europeans are desperate for tourists to go in because it's the bedrock of their economy. So I do see that there would be an appetite, a late appetite this year, if you like, in September, October onwards. people were able to travel, despite the fact there'll be restrictions around health and safety and so on, then there is that demand for people to want to travel. But that's not going to have a massive effect, clearly. But I think as we move into 2021, and on the assumption that there's a degree of freedom to travel, subject to health and safety, then I do see a positive rebound, if you like, not 100% rebound. I suspect the market will be smaller in 2021, but I think there will be sufficient growth in the industry to give the companies that operate in our sector confidence that there is a future there. And that's the perspective I would take on that. I know with some of the companies I'm involved in, I'm not talking about big numbers here, but the appetite for travel in 2021 is increasing week by week. And I've seen with a number of the companies over the last month in particular, the number of new bookings. So 5-6 weeks ago, we weren't taking any new bookings at all. Over the last 3 to 4 weeks, we started those new bookings, seeing those new bookings coming in for 2021. So I do see on the leisure side of the industry, then actually there will be a rebound. I think it's going to be quite cautious. I don't think everybody's going to be queuing up in January as they used to, in massive numbers. I think it will be progressive. I expect that the overall market, next year will be, you're getting back to what was it like in last year, 2019, and it probably may not touch 2019 levels, but it will be actually on its path. So to answer the question a different way, if you're looking for what would represent normalization, I would say 2022 would be the year when you would actually see us all in full swing, back, because the inherent forecast prior to this was always that people wanted to travel, and travel would grow exponentially around the world. And I think we've put some real distance between the virus and a clear path going forward, then I expect that will still be the case.
Do you think that we would return to a travel industry that's different, though? Because to go back to the issues we've had with deposits and, people not getting their money back, and, everybody's talking about, all tour operators work with very thin margins, and you get the online travel agencies that work with, they're making £10 a booking and stuff like that. I mean, do you think that we will have an industry that perhaps is looking for better margins, less discounting, and also return, hopefully, to the quality of the product that they're selling, rather than just purely numbers all the time? Many of the conferences I've been to in the last 3 or 4 years, all that anybody ever wants to talk about is numbers. They just talk about, we've built a new hotel, we've got 5% increase here, this and that, and it's all to do with numbers. It's very, very rare that we talk about the holiday experience and the quality of the holiday that people will have.
Yeah, there's a number of points there, Graham. Firstly, in terms of what could the industry look like in terms of the margins that have been historically, if you like. I could see a situation where the model changes, where there will be much more focus, first of all, on protecting customer monies. And I see there will be a big drive, maybe not legislated initially, but certainly a big drive to actually securing customer monies, whether that's through a trust fund or some other vehicle, so the customers can not have to go through the experience they're going through currently in terms of waiting for money to come back, because if the money's in a trust fund, they can get access to that money quickly. So I do see pressure on that, and actually some of that pressure will be self-started by progressive companies. We already know companies out there that have operated that model for some time, and have been very, very successful in doing so. And I do see companies will follow. So I think the protection side is one. Two, I think there will be more emphasis on quality coming through rather than just volume. You need a degree of volume, obviously, to drive income, to cover your overheads and so on. But I think there's going to be a lot more of a quality dimension coming in. There is a consequence of that, of course, and it's likely the prices will rise as a result. But on the other hand, it's my personal view. It's probably better to have a slightly smaller market, but a higher quality market, than just going for volume at, as you say, £10 a passenger.
So a better travel industry rather than necessarily a bigger travel industry.
Yeah, I think it's going to be it should be a better travel industry, and not necessarily bigger. I think the market will still grow over time, maybe not in the next 12 months, as we discussed earlier, but I still think the market will grow, but it won't be as a result of those days where people had a lot of fixed assets. In other words, they own the planes, they own the hotels, and therefore they were obliged to get the volume to fill those. Well, today, in our market, certainly in the UK, there's only one tour operator that actually has that totally vertically integrated model now, and that's TUI. Even entrants that have come in, like Jet2, EasyJet, and so on, they've got the assets in terms of the planes, but they don't own the hotels. So they do have flexibility. So I do see that there will be a push towards margin, a push to a better experience for the customer. Plus, the technology helps us with customers on better experience, because there's lots of stuff you can do virtually now to really excite the customers, to want to go to places they haven't been before. And then I think finally it's coming back to the businesses themselves. Those that come out of this and survive will probably have to operate in a different way. And what do I mean by that? I think they need to look critically at their existing business model and say, is it fit for purpose for the future? Or do I need to change things? Or am I doing things that I've always done the same way over the last 20 years, but actually it's not really suitable for today's and tomorrow's market? So I think this is a perfect time in some respects of going through this period, tough though it is, for people, the owners of businesses, to take a step back and say, is my business model the right one for the future? And now, if you're going to make changes, this is a perfect time to do it. So it's creating more experiences that we've touched on for customers, getting them excited about that. It's probably new ways of reaching customers as well, because one of the things we've learned through the shutdown is actually you can relate to people virtually. You can still talk to people, we can transact business with them. It doesn't take away the human sort of interface, if you like, at all, but it takes away the face-to-face contact in a real sense. But it does work for that. So I think we've got to get much more adaptive to that. In the distribution chain, for example, shops, travel shops, I think that's going to have to be a new experience as well. Certainly the stores are going to have to be reconfigured so that they apply and abide by health and safety. And I suspect over the next 12 months, there's going to be a bit of caution by consumers about just flocking back to crowded high streets. I think they'll be a lot more sensitive to that. So I think if you're a retail travel agent with a physical shop, it will still have a role to play, but you've got to do a lot more of your business visually, whether it's using vehicles like Zoom, and so on. So you're still interacting with your customers, but they don't need to come into the shop to actually do that. So I think that's something that needs to be looked at quite clearly in terms of your business model. This is the time to reshape your business. You may be forced to reshape it through circumstances. You might have to downsize in some cases. But if you downsize in the right way, you've got a leaner, fitter business that understands its customers a lot better, then actually you've probably got a better role to play, which is not about volume, it's about quality, and it's about better margins.
Talking about another mega travel business with vertical integration, which had its own aeroplanes, had its own hotels, but came down to earth with a huge bump and a crash last year, which was one you've been long-term associated with, which is Thomas Cook. You quite, what's the word I'm looking for, admirably set up a fund for those that were made redundant and lost their jobs at Thomas Cook last year. They've really had a double whammy in terms of what's happening. They've lost their jobs and now they've got COVID-19 to deal with. I wonder if you could just bring me up to date. We have probably about 20 tweets a week about a story that we ran way back in October or November or sometime about the status and the mental health of ex-Thomas Cook employees. I wonder if you have a better feel for it and you can bring us up to date.
Yes, I'd be happy to do that. Firstly, on Thomas Cook, without reliving the experience and the reasons why, obviously it was a very sad event. You had a company that was founded in 1841, an iconic brand, and frankly, and I have said this publicly, the reason for the demise was actually um, largely attributable to management over a period of time. I'm not pointing the finger at the people who were in place at the time the company went down. I think they were in a very difficult position. But nevertheless, it came as a brutal shock to everybody. I remember that evening when I heard the news. And the next day, I live in Peterborough, which is where the head office of Thomas Cook was. Yeah. And the next day, I was seeing people physically. I was bumping into them. Everybody distraught, in tears, and so on. And in terms of the campaign, I'll briefly touch on that. Myself and John Donaldson, who you may know, John was the former CEO of Thomas Cook, and I was the MD of the UK business. We got together and said, there must be something we can do about this. So what we agreed to do is we would contact all of the network that we had, which we built up over many years, and encourage them to support us in the campaign that we ran with ABTA Lifeline. And the idea was to get personal donations from those people into us over a period of time. We set ourselves a bar of 100,000. We eventually ended up getting in excess of £200,000 for that. And that money was distributed via ABTA Lifeline in a way that went to people who had immediate needs. And it could be basic things like simply putting food on the table. You know, because you had situations where both breadwinners were working for Thomas Cook, and immediately they were out of work. And then you had people with more individual cases that had more pressing needs or greater needs or whatever the circumstances may be. And so we paid out a lot of money. In fact, most of the money that we gathered went out in a period of probably 3 months. So from October onwards through to the turn of the year. And ABTA Lifeline is still there as a vehicle to help Thomas Cook employees, as well as anybody else in the travel industry who've fallen onto hard times. And you can reach, people can reach that through the ABTA Lifeline site. But you're right, that actually fulfilled the short-term need. At the time, what we were finding is John Hayes and Irene Hayes stepped in and picked up the retail stores, which was great news. For the industry, great news for the people. It's giving them a difficult challenge now with the virus coming in and everything else, but speaking to them, they're coming through it well, which I'm really pleased about. But then you have the, and other people got jobs as well, but the two major hubs in the UK that actually had less success was the Manchester Airport hub with the engineers and everything else for the planes, and of course the head office in Peterborough. And they found alternative employment quite difficult. Some of the airline people did get jobs with other airlines, but of course the airlines are now laying people off. And if they're probably the first, you know, the last in, they're probably going to be the first out, unfortunately. And there's still people in Peterborough, I know, that worked in the head office that haven't yet been successful. So ABTA is trying to do what it can to continue to raise funds. It's a difficult time this year because getting people to donate to charities, which is what Lifeline is, with all the other competing needs. So you mentioned the NHS, for example. It is quite difficult, but we are committed. I'm still a trustee of the Lifeline. We are committed to continue to try and help these people. We've also introduced them to people like the Citizens Advice Bureau that give them a wealth of advice of opportunities they may be able to pursue in terms of, grants for money, etc., government aid, all those sort of things, even helping them identify employment opportunities. So they've done all of that, but nevertheless, it is still quite a difficult position for some of those Thomas Cook employees who today are probably still unemployed.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right about John and Irene. It would have been very easy for them to basically retire into their northeast Nirvana and help Sunderland get into the championship. But you know, to take on a task and a huge project like that, I'm full of admiration for them. John,
Yeah.
I'd like to thank you very much for your time this morning. It's been very interesting. I could speak for another 20 minutes, but I know that you're busy, and I just want to say thanks. It's very good, and I think that if people are looking and do have any spare money, and then obviously the Thomas Cook and the ABTA Lifeline is a very, very worthy cause, as are all the others at the moment that are supporting our NHS and our essential workers. So thanks very much, John, and I look forward to seeing you at Goodison when you're still in mid-table mediocrity.
No, we're going to aim higher than that, Graham. Thanks very much. Good to talk to you.
Cheers.
Okay, bye.